All right, buddy, you ready to get this started again?
Yeah, let's do it.
That's it? There's no joke that you want to make or no little funny thing that you wanted to do ahead of time?
Buddy, I'm a pro. Let's just start the podcast.
All right, theme music it is. Here we go.
Welcome to We Got Nets, a podcast about Brooklyn's finest. Here are your hosts, Adam Armbrecht and Doug Norrie.
All right, welcome back to the We Got Nets podcast. I'm Doug Norrie. Over there is Adam Armbrecht. And we're going to be talking all things Brooklyn all year long, as you already know if you're a first-time listener. And there's already, we're not even into free agency, and it feels like there's already so much stuff to talk about. Buddy, you're a lifelong Nets fan. Can you even believe that we're going to get into it here in a second, but can you believe that we're sitting here, it's June something or other, June 25th, and we're talking Kevin Durant coming to the Nets. It's not official yet, but the fact that that name is even moving across the lips of Nets fans, where are you right now? Because this is, we're getting into legit superstar territory. We'll talk about the positives and negatives possibly about it, but just saying the name, how does it get you feeling as a Nets fan?
Yeah, it's a big conversation to be having this time of year. And I think if you asked this question earlier about what the prospects were for the Nets, Kevin Durant was not on the radar by a long shot. So it's definitely heating up this time of year, and it's getting pretty exciting and nice for a Nets fan like myself to be able to have some real positive energy at this time of year.
Well, look, let's get into why this is kind of starting to formulate even more into an actual thought rather than just speculation. So there's been a couple things that have happened over the last, we'll call it the weekend plus. One is Bleacher Report publishes a graphic that has Caesar's book had Durant as a minus 125 favorite to join the Nets in the offseason. That was easily the best odds. Obviously it's making it better than 1-to-1 odds that's going to happen. So that's piece number one. Now, I will say about that there are no other active lines on that bet that I could find. I looked on Bet Online, MyBookie. I even tried to find the Caesars line that said that. They weren't taking action on it, so Take that for what it's worth. Second one is Zach Lowe comes out with a story this morning about the Nets' future and has talking about Durant plus the Irving piece and sort of like where D'Angelo fits into that as well. Tommy Beer wrote a piece for Forbes that kind of details the same thing. This is all to say this is real news at this point. Now, whether it happens or not is still anybody's guess, really, but these are all the signs that sort of start to happen when things are about to kind of try to this may transform a franchise. So I guess we'll start too. Where do you stand on, do you want it to happen? This is a guy coming off an Achilles injury, obviously. This is also a top 5 in the whole NBA or higher player when he's healthy. There's so much speculation around. Let's assume he's not going to play a full season. Where do you stand just on wanting to get him? Are we pro bringing in Durant at this point?
Yeah, and and we've talked about this on the other podcast when we focused a lot on Kyrie, and now all of a sudden with Durant in this conversation, it shifts gears a little bit. But the weird thing for me is if you told me that we could sign Durant and know that he maybe is going to miss the entire season, if it wasn't contingent on having Kyrie, I think it would change. It would change it a little bit because I could make the case that maybe I'd like them just to re-sign Russell, let him play out this next year when you know Durant is going to be off the team for a long period of time. Let him continue to develop and grow, and then Durant comes back in, and the following season you're looking at hopefully Russell has taken that next step and shown a level of consistency like we saw last year, and then you move forward with that. So I'm a little conflicted that getting Durant is basically all based around the fact that Kyrie looks like he's coming here, and now he is convinced Durant that this is the direction that he should be going as well. So there's a little bit of, I guess, confusion for myself in there. And I think that the Nets are at least a solid year away, and we've talked about this before as well, from being, conference finals contenders and going to the finals. So I don't necessarily look at it as a waste of a season because Durant's not going to be on the court next year. I look at it as, we're going to need another season to develop our team anyway, so it's okay to look at this as being 2 seasons from now, we really make the push.
Yeah, because you don't want to. I know what you're saying. You're like, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater if we bring in Durant if it means getting some other possibly toxic asset. I'm assuming that's what you're saying in Kyrie. I don't know if we either this is the big part. A lot of these pieces that everyone's just trying to weigh, and they, he polled league executives and said, who would you rather have? And pretty much to a man, it was Kyrie over D'Angelo, even when you took in when you factored in the money, which wasn't a huge difference. And I think that's what you're saying. It's like, well, if it's going to come at the cost of having to bring in this other guy who could submarine a franchise just because he's freaking weird. And I don't want to redo our whole podcast from last time, so go back and listen to our many thoughts about the weirdness behind Kyrie and just the dude's just very odd. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying, but here's the thing. With Durant, I'm always pro go and just try to get the very best guy and take the risk, if you will. Now, in this case, it's the risk of the injury. Last year with Kawhi, it was the risk of he's not going to stay in Toronto. These are the risks that you take. OKC did this with Paul George. They took a risk to bring in a guy that could leave. Again, it's a slightly different risk because we're talking injury here, but risking it on the very best players in the game is the exact thing, in my opinion, that you do. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. And it sucks. But the difference.
But no one's gonna fault the Nets for signing Kevin Durant.
They might. Well, here's the thing: they might because if you're Sean Marks and Kevin Durant comes back at 50% of Kevin Durant, that's the end of the franchise for a lot of years. I know what you're saying. Like right now, we might not fault him doing it, but Kevin Durant is 2 years into a max, the ultra max contract, the super max basically, and he's a shell of himself. And he has no lift and he can't shoot anymore. I'm going worst case scenario here. He can't stay on the court for long periods of time because the Achilles never fully healed. Sean Marks is going to get the blame and he's going to get fired. So I know what you're saying. Like now it looks like all, sunshine and rainbows and what. God.
No, because that's kind of the thing too. Is I wonder, you were just talking about how there's been a couple of national articles, like it's gaining some traction as far as Durant to the Nets, and the bet line, even though it's hard to confirm it in other locations, it seems like this is getting a lot of traction. The only thing that I find interesting about it is that, and I know what Kevin Durant is, a top 5 player, and he's going to go down historically that way, but it does seem counterintuitive to the Nets model. Now I know that that's a product of where the franchise was when Sean Marks came in and bringing in Kenny Atkinson. It has been a process, but this does seem like a very pivoting move to go this aggressively in a direction. And again, we may not even be having this conversation. I would assume we're not having this conversation if Durant didn't have the injury in the playoffs. I don't think the Nets would be in the same position, but it seems interesting that it very much is a direction shift in a hard way for the Nets. And I just wonder this time of year, how do you, quantify or qualify this information that you get about this stuff? Because I feel like you could turn around and maybe not even just with the Nets, any of these situations in free agency, all of a sudden you turn around in 2 weeks and, Durant signs back with the Warriors and Kyrie, signs with the Knicks, whatever it may be. And it's all just kind of like, yeah, that's the way, off-season goes, the way free agency goes. A lot of information, a lot of news and notes. So that's a weird inclination that I have where I'm like, man, this seems counterintuitive for what they've been working towards. Does that hold any water to you, or is it just that these are generational players or, game changing for this franchise and that's why they do it?
Well, those things, I get what you're saying. It seems like a shift because the team has been a certain way for so long, but that's because they've had to be that way for so long, right? In the NBA, your whole model, every team's model, and I don't think you would even need to give the team's truth serum to figure this out, but because most will just say that it is. Some might say, oh, we're trying to develop a culture. Like, everyone develops a culture when you stink. Like, you hear a lot of culture talk when you're not very good and you're just trying to be a little bit better than you should be. That's when you're developing a culture. What most teams are trying to do is just get the very best players and then win, right? So, that's the ultimate thing that you're wanting to do. So I get what you're saying. It seems like a shift in mentality, except that the mentality has been gather assets, gather good contracts, take on bad money to get other assets, give away money when you want to clear the books, and then get the very best player. Because ultimately that is the goal. It only seems different now because it really hadn't been a choice. Last year in the offseason, nobody was coming here. Right. But now the tone has shifted because people might come here. But this is all still start of the same plan. The plan was never to sign the Jared Dudleys and DeMarre Carrolls of the world and just kind of and hope that you just get by with them. That's not the plan. Those were those were tracks, along the longer run of train track to get you to this place. But it was never meant to be these were never meant to be the pieces that built the entire track, I don't think.
Right, and the interesting thing about that too is we talked about how the Nets, say overachieved, but they took a big leap forward last year, and I guess even to that point that you're making about it's about the end game and where we're trying to get to. And the Dudleys are not the guys that I assume are a part of the future, but
right.
I think the interesting signing up for him, which we haven't touched on this as a complete quick side note. How in the face of Simmons Dudley got in that playoff series. And how much at the time I was like, oh, what a trade-off. Take Dudley out and take Simmons. It's a win for us. And then on the back end, I was like, that actually cost us. It was actually terrible on Dudley's part, which was just a weird, which almost I'm like, yeah, because Dudley, you're not a smart you know what I mean? It's just that weird fluky thing that happens in a playoff game.
I kind of will miss the awkward guy at the Y look that Dudley always brought to the game. It's just like the guy sitting on the sidelines calling "We got next," and you're just like, I don't know, man. I get the headband, the kind of the bulbous head. I don't know. Are we
wearing all the gear with none of the skill?
Right, exactly.
But
just got dressed up just completely perfectly, but you can tell the whole thing's a little bit off. I can see him wearing a hat a little bit weird when he left the stadium. It just all looks a little bit like he's wearing the Nets hat, but it's just not completely broke in correctly. I could see that being the look. Jared Dudley, you're great. We love you. Okay, so Durant, couple stats on Durant, because I know some people are gonna say, well, how good is Durant? If there's people out there questioning how good a Durant is, I don't know if those people exist. But just in case, last season he was 7th overall in win shares for the whole NBA, and just the guys that are ahead of him were all the kind of the superstars that you're thinking about. Some of these things have to do a little bit with defense. His offensive win shares, he was 5th overall. These are again not perfect stats. PER, he was top 10. Actually, he was 14. Actually, Kyrie was a little bit one step higher than him in PR. I know people have issues with PER in general. It's a player efficiency rating. It's not a perfect. None of these are perfect stats. Some of these things are hard to quantify. But overall, no one's going to
factors.
Yeah, there's a lot of other factors that come into these things, and some of them are cumulative too. So if you just had a non-injury late season, that's going to look a lot better. Like Kawhi sat out every second half or first half of a back-to-back. So he's played 12 games less than some of these guys. So if you have cumulative stats, they're going to get thrown off a little bit. But I don't think from a statistical standpoint anyone's making really any argument against Durant. It's just this philosophical sort of meta question of, well, is it worth it to have him sit out a whole year? Because you are going to lose a whole year of him on the books as well. That's not an insignificant thing too. I mean, if we're going into the season looking at a Kyrie plus LeVert, plus Jared Allen, plus Taurean Prince, and then it's kind of escaping me right now who their 5th starter would be. I guess Joe Harris. Is that team good enough for you? Are we looking at is a playoff? Is everyone going to go into the season thinking, hey, we're a year away from Durant. We'll make the playoffs with this team almost definitely in the East. We'll try to just walk the tightrope of Kyrie.
Yeah.
And then is that good enough for you going into the season? Because we are going to – this Durant thing is – it really can't be lost. We're not going to see this guy for pretty much a whole year. That's almost a guarantee. So the day he signs it's going to be a long time till we see him even in a uniform. So I don't want that to be lost either.
No, the day he signs is the day you write the get well soon card, and you stick it in the mailbox, and then forget that and then try to act like you don't know that he's on your team for a year. I guess this is it's a minor thing, but the Nets go to the playoffs last year as the 6th seed, and I guess what you end up looking at is what will you say is progress for them, right? Certainly, if it's going to be Kyrie on the team, you have like I said, Joe Harris and Dinwiddie and Jared Allen. You brought in Prince. We're going to go a little bit into the draft picks they had, but whoever it is on the court with him, the barometer, and I think maybe for a lot of Nets fans, especially the ones that are maybe in the D'Angelo Russell camp, and I'd be curious how that's shifted now that it looks like Durant is a much more favorable option for us. It's going to be about what's your progress in the playoff time, right? So getting a series win, I think that's going to be the benchmark, probably, I would say, with Kyrie Irving, because that's what you're saying. We're going to go ahead and revoke the rights to Russell. We're going to bring in Kyrie. We're going to sign Durant. We know it's going to take him a year, but we expect Kyrie to come in and get us another step up. And then the following year, when Durant comes back, that's what's supposed to put us over the top. That's when we make the push. You go to the conference finals. You expect to win them in the East. You expect to be in 2 years contending for an Eastern Conference title and to be going to the finals. So I think next year it's going to be about cohesion with the current players that are on the roster. And this is the kind of thing that we talked about before with the Boston roster and how it was impacted when Kyrie came in, and the way that some of those personalities were upset by the presence of Kyrie and how it impacted their ability to play their game. So that's going to be, I think, the big gauge next year is how does Kyrie come in, how does he adapt, and how does the team as a whole look as they progress through the season, and assuming, get into the playoffs and go for a first round victory.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, it's funny because I think there's going to be a measure of patience that is going to need to exist, not having Durant and having his money on the books. I think that's going to take I think people, basically what I'm saying is I think come December, it's going to be easy to forget that Durant is technically on the team but not playing, right, because we're going to be wanting to see the results of the current team on the court. I will say the Nets, again, have positioned themselves sort of perfectly this is by nothing they did on their own, that the rest of the East is ripe for a team that can sort of be in half rebuild mode. And I'm going to call them half rebuild because when you're waiting for Durant, that's sort of where you are. You have, if you had one guy in Kyrie, you have half the build there, and then you're waiting on the rest of it. But the East is going to be so weak this year that I think they could even get away with it. Because if you just run down the list, and I'm going to assume even Kawhi re-signs with Toronto, which are really all signs are pointing that that's going to happen, although the guy, who knows with this guy. Bucks, let's just say they maintain the status quo. They're going to still be there. Let's say the Raptors are still there as well. Same with the Sixers. You have to assume the Celtics are taking a step back. They're not going to have Horford or Kyrie there. The Pacers are almost definitely going to take a step back. When I say take a step back, I mean from their overall wins from last season, because they're now going to have basically a whole season without Oladipo. The Magic are in flux because Vooch may or may not re-sign there. It would be a big blow for them not to re-sign him, and they are not on really seem any list of any free agents. Detroit pretty much the same. And then really all the teams that didn't make the playoffs, outside of maybe the Hawks, it's really hard to see how they're going to get any better in the offseason. That's the Hornets, Heat, Wizards. I do like the Hawks. Bulls are a train wreck. Cavs are worse. And the Knicks are a disaster. I guess the Knicks could bring in a free agent, and that would change their outlook a little bit too. But so now, and the reason I'm just listing all these teams is to say you can have this sort of half measure and wait and see approach and still take a step forward in terms of overall wins. Maybe a playoff push. Maybe actually, honestly, there's a world in which that squad with a couple other pieces actually has a home court advantage in the first round too. So
that's what I was going to ask.
I think I'm with it.
Yeah, where's the seed? What do you think their seed is? Will they have a home series next playoffs? And just by the information you lay out there, like that's what I think you would love to see happen. And it lines up perfectly for them to be able to accomplish that. And I think it would kind of be almost the appearance of progress, even if it is just treading water until Durant comes back. But that nice visual, hey, we jumped up to a 4 seed the following year after getting back to the playoffs. It just feels good, looks good to the fan base and to internally to the organization, being like, yeah, this is the right move for us.
Yeah, like we had 42 wins with basically nothing out of LeVert because he breaks his leg in two, essentially. And then with D'Angelo Russell, a full season of LeVert plus Kyrie, plus a lot of swapping out Prince for Carroll, basically. Another minor move here or there. Maybe let's bring up now DeAndre Jordan. Actually, let's take a quick break. We'll get into the DeAndre Jordan thing, and then we will kind of finish this off with draft picks. Okay, before we get to the next segment, we just wanted to say right now we're a new show, and the best way to support We Got Nets is to go over to iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts and rate and review us. 5 stars or don't bother. That goes without saying. So 5 stars, don't bother. But iTunes, wherever you listen on podcasts. And also visit WeGotNets.com, where we'll be posting show notes, other tidbits all season long. We really appreciate everyone that's jumped on board early looking to keep this going. And that is the very best way you can help the show right now. So subscribe and rate us and review us on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, back to the show. All right, I teased it a little bit before our mini break there, but the other piece of the rumor mill, we'll call it, that's come along sort of with, I wouldn't even call it tangentially, it seems like it's running parallel to the Irving and Durant piece, is the idea that DeAndre Jordan he's done with this. He's a free agent now because the Knicks got him for sort of fodder to be able to clear cap space. I don't think that's going to end up working out the way they thought it was going to. But either way, he's coming up as a free agent now, and there's talks that he is kind of attached to these two other guys. That already Irving and Durant seemed attached to each other. It seems like these two want to play together, and that's sort of why the rumor mill is starting. But now DeAndre might be coming along with them too. And man, yeah. I don't know. I get that these guys are all boys, and you need to figure out, the keys to superstars is to keep them happy. And they all seem to want to play with their friends, or at least guys they think are their friends before they start playing together, and then they all hate each other, which seems to be the other theme that kind of runs along the lines of this stuff. But man, DeAndre Jordan, do we want any piece of this guy? I have some thoughts on DeAndre, but and I don't know. I don't know if I'm just couching in too much of my negativity, so you already know where I'm going to go here. But what are your thoughts about having DeAndre sort of being the third guy in their old banana boat coming along to play
coming on down the river? There they are. Because they got the Speedos on. They're all waving. They're having a hell of a time out there. Yeah,
I'm all for guys getting. I'm all for helping your friends out. Believe me, it's not that. It's just like if it comes at the expense of. I'm just gonna assume it'd be like some kind of veteran minimum. God, anything more. Anyway, DeAndre Jordan being attached to these two names, does it ring? Does it ring as something you want? Because we really didn't mention this as being the third part of what could possibly happen as we go into next season.
Well, I guess this is my red flag about the whole situation, right? We're going to bring in Kyrie, and that brings us Durant. Durant's going to be out for a year, but that's okay because we're going to continue to build our roster and get better. And then you go, and we're also going to bring, if it's about and this is the last piece to convince these guys to come here, is someone who and this is someone like that you've really educated me on after, he played for the Clippers for so many years. You're like, yeah, DeAndre Jordan, he's not good anymore. He's not a quality player for you anymore. So this is where I start to get concerned because now you're telling me that you're bringing in players or pieces to appease someone. And you and I have talked about this off podcast about LeBron James and how in certain scenarios you thought, wow, this guy really has his finger on the pulse of how to make a roster because look at all these great moves and playing with these teammates. And then you saw how he also had the ability to cripple a franchise through moves like this. So this is a concern to me. And this is something where all of a sudden I look at the existing roster and I start to say, well, who are the guys that I really think can keep to develop and can be contributors for this team long term? Who are you shipping off to bring in DeAndre Jordan? And what kind of contract are you throwing at this guy?
That's the ultimate thing. Is what is the contract? Because again, if we're gonna do the old, I'm calling the veterans minimum or just some low-level 1-year contract or something like that, or 2 years because he actually wanted to play with Durant.
That's what's weird to me too, right? You're going to bring him in for a year when Durant's not even going to be there,
Well, this is the crazy thing, and people have an idea of DeAndre Jordan as being this. I mean, he's huge, so don't get me wrong about that. He's listed at 6'11". He probably almost in some ways plays bigger than that. Mm-hmm. He really almost plays like a 7-footer plus. This is a guy that has severe limitations, especially in the current structure of the NBA and the way the NBA is played. He really has no post game at all. If you look at his shot chart, it's essentially rim dives that he's getting off of pick and rolls that kind of went awry on switches, and even these have become less and less as the years have gone on as teams have figured this out. He's very slow on defense at this point. You can switch, he gets absolutely destroyed in switches, and if you get him away from the basket at all, just say goodnight. So I know people, if you casually watch the NBA, you're going to have this DeAndre Jordan on the Clippers idea of when he was playing with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin, and they really were. It was like the Lob City Clippers, and he was just destroying the rim because he was on these pick and rolls that they sniffed out time and time again. Yep. That guy is not coming through the door of the Barclays Center. That is not who you're getting at this point. This is a guy who's extremely limited on defense at this point with his speed. He's very slow-footed. He offers nothing in the way of the offensive game. His shot chart is basically dunk or nothing. He can't shoot free throws at all. I take that back. He actually improved last year a little bit with the free throw shooting. Got it up over 70%. He was like a 40% lock guy for years. This is not a guy I want. If it's for a very low price and that's the last deciding piece of getting Durant and Kyrie through the door, and you think that's the way to go, fine. I don't want people to fall in love with what they think DeAndre Jordan is, because that is again, that is not the same guy. You're not getting 2014 with Chris Paul, DeAndre Jordan. It's just not coming through the door.
Yeah, and I guess like you said, when you frame it in the way of quote unquote veterans minimum or relatively cheap contract, I'm not gonna be disgusted by it, but at the same time, especially on the roster, when you look at the current roster, he's gonna get volume minutes, and he's probably gonna get he's going to be a stat stuffer, meaningless stats, but he'll be getting them. Because I remember when we had talked about him, I think when he was on Dallas probably, and I had said, I was like, I look at his stat lines, he's got 10, 12 rebounds, like, whatever, and you see these numbers without seeing him play, and it can maybe mislead you to thinking he still is more capable than you realize. And the final thing that I would say on it too is all of his deficiencies, which, I mean, you just laid out a myriad of them, but they're also things that then it doesn't compliment Jared Allen to have a guy that doesn't have an offensive perimeter shot at all, that has no mid-range game. You know what I mean? So, like, not only does he have deficiencies, it's also deficiencies that line up with a young player you have on your roster. So you're doubling down on not having a presence in certain areas from the 5 position. That just seems like a massive mistake to me. So I'll be curious to see if these rumors really do have truth to them, but I also would just love to see them get away from this conversation altogether.
And look, it's not lost to me. The Nets' biggest deficiency last season was interior post defense. They really, really struggled, and especially they were already rough with Allen, and then they had really nothing to go to beyond him, and they bring in Ed Davis, obviously, but their defense in the interior was the worst in the league. I don't really know. There's no other way to put it. They allowed something like 20% more scoring to opposing centers than league average. It was really, really abysmal stuff. DeAndre is better than what they would bring in, or what they probably had last year. So I really want to couch it like that. He's not on the level of kind of what they were bringing in to face opposing big men. He's just also, I'm just saying, he's just not, I think, the DeAndre Jordan that, NBA Twitter has in their mind of just like, oh, this guy can grab 14 boards a game and he's a double guy every night. Like, yes, he can be those things, and it really comes to the expense of other things. So that's really all. If it's a minimum contract, you probably are getting better defense from him than you got out of what, when they would run like RHJ at the 5 at times, or the crazy stuff they were kind of forced into doing last season. So probably somewhat of an improvement there. But I'm mostly cautioning on just the name DeAndre Jordan probably carries more cachet than his actual game does.
Yeah.
At this point, let's get into the draft real quick about where
sir.
if you think the Nets addressed any of their needs. Look, they're selecting in the late first round, second round. It's going to be hard to fill based on need at that point. You're probably just taking. Well, what are your thoughts? You're probably just taking projects that you're hoping eventually work out. When you saw how their draft worked out. Did you feel like it's going to help them at all, or is this kind of, or these guys that we might not even see 2 years from now because that's just going to be the way it's going to go? What are your thoughts here on how the Nets got out of the draft?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it does go hand in hand with what happens in free agency. As far as 2 years from now, who knows what happens with the roster, but. End of the first round, they take Claxton. What I like about it is that Ed Davis is moving on, and he's looking for a big contract in free agency, and he deserves to get it somewhere. And I'm glad that it's not going to be with us. But he's a young kid that from everything that I read on the scouting book on him, from a defensive perspective, he rotates well and will probably be better at that than Jared Allen currently is. So that's a positive. It means that, again, we're talking about comparing to DeAndre Jordan, like. Okay, he's going to do something better that Allen is deficient at. So he rotates well on defense. He's going to be able to be a shot blocker. Unfortunately, like Allen, he is also kind of a slender frame, so he's going to need to bulk up to be able to kind of take the pounding underneath the basket. So that's going to be an area that, and a lot of players out of college have to do that. It's just unfortunate that the Nets are fairly light, I'll say, at most positions in terms of physical presence. He's good on the transition. He can play on the ball himself. He can get underneath, he can get to the basket. He can score on his own. He's an inconsistent shooter away from the basket, so I think he'll be better than Allen when it comes to having a mid-range shot, because Allen doesn't have any shot. So so you are going to gain some improvement in that area when he comes onto the court, and And yes, and he's a developmental player. That's what everything says too, is that he's going to need to be built up. He's going to need to come along. I think the good news is too, though, is that if you're going the route of Kyrie Irving, he's going to benefit from a player on the court at the point guard position and spacing, and he should be able to get some good shots. The thing that I think he lacks that you wish the Nets could address, and again, the idea of a DeAndre Jordan or any of these big men, you want someone that has a little bit of range on their shot because it's going to open up the lane. It's going to allow the other players on the team to either, one, get better looks from the outside, or be able to penetrate from the point guard position, drive the lane, and have easier opportunities at the basket, because we saw a lot last year that they were, point guards were getting swallowed up underneath the basket because there was no one else to worry about from the 4 or 5 position. So that would be my, as brief as I can be, because again, summer league will get going and we'll start to kind of see who they are and we'll see where minutes look like as we head towards the regular season. But he's a developmental player. He gives you depth, and I think that that's important no matter what. You want to keep getting stronger behind your starting roles, and I think the Nets have done that with Claxton.
Yeah, it's again, these are always going to be. It's rare that you're going to find the Draymonds and Pascal Siakams of the world at the back of the first round and the second round. Mm-hmm. I know those guys are going to be more the exception to the rule than the actual thing. So I always want to. It's just always better to take a wait and see. I'm always more encouraged when teams like the Nets have sort of been able to find better. Like they seem to have a slightly better process than some other teams. That is a real thing. That's a repeatable process. You can just have better process around who your draft pick is going to be. There's teams that seem to make, like the Phoenix Suns are a good example, sort of like mistakes every single year and just what they're doing. Don't seem to have a process or a plan or a clue. I'm always a little bit more encouraged when a team has just taken an analytical approach and just says, look, we know what the plan is. We have a business plan. We've written it out. We have a player development plan. We've written it out. We know what it is, and we're going to follow it. And more often than not, you're going to not hit home runs, but you're going to at least hit enough doubles that it's going to end up being worth it. And really, with the late first round, second round, you're looking to hit solid singles, doubles, maybe a triple, and every once in a while you get a home run. But it's really not going to happen. But again, you can live in the singles and doubles camp in that range and still be a very good team.
Yeah, and I'll try to be a little more concise on Jalen Hands, just because again, we don't want to dive too deep on these guys. But he's another guy, you bring him in, and usually, and you've said this too, is detaching the draft from free agency and moves and how they're related to one another. I will say, if the indications are Kyrie is coming in, you're moving on from Russell, makes sense to bring in another guy at the point guard position. A lot of his attributes seem like they're similar to D'Angelo Russell. Upside comparatively, just from a scouting standpoint, would be that he is a physical and more able defender naturally than Russell was coming to the league, and even how he improved the past season. So that would be nice. He already has NBA range shooting, has quickness. He's going to be able to drive the lane, get to the basket. He gives you some pretty solid rebounding from the point guard position, and then things that he's going to want to work on and develop when he gets into the lane. Indications are that his floater, being able to kind of have that little teardrop when you can't get all the way to the basket, going to want to work on that. He can get a little bit sloppy and loose with the ball. This sounds familiar to everybody. Russell suffered from a lot of these traits as well. So, these are things you can coach out of somebody. And then finally, he can get a little bit tunnel visioned when it comes to the player that, looking for a player, looking for the outlet. So you're potentially going to see when he is on the court, maybe a little bit of stagnant, where he's trying to work it around to Harris in the corner, or he wants to get it down low, and he may get swallowed up by the defense at times. But these are things that all rookies go through, even the best of them. So what I will say is it's nice to have another guy that looks like he's going to be able to come in potentially under Kyrie, learn, contribute, and go forward from there. So like you said, and I, to your point, the Nets have been able to hit on guys, and even players that they brought in that were discarded by other teams around the league, came in, learned the system, and were able to be contributors. So I do have confidence in the organization to identify these players well. So I assume that, these are two guys, come in, learn the system, and see how they develop. And it'll be nice in a season when maybe you've signed Durant and he's not going to be on the court. It means that a lot of these other guys are going to get even more minutes to continue to develop their game.
Yeah, totally. I like it. I like the thought process. Like I said, I always have a little bit more confidence with teams that at least just have a plan. That's all I wanted. The plan doesn't even need to be perfect, but typically teams with plans end up further along than teams without them, just by virtue of sort of all being on the same page. All right, Beef, we are less than a week now away from free agency, and I say free agency because players can actually sign on Monday, July 1st, I believe is the first day of actual NBA free agency. I think it's noon. Oh, no, excuse me. I take that back. It's noon, July 6th. So we're still a little bit more than a week away, from actually being able to sign. We'll probably try to shoot in another podcast between then and now, the way that this NBA news cycle works. I'm sure we'll have something else to just that will come up, or some other crazy scenario that will come up. By then, I will have also finished my first Dungeons and Dragons game with my old crew. So I know you're going to get excited about that. I can drop some D&D knowledge on everybody. I can actually just maybe I'll just write up character sheets for every Nets guy. I think people would appreciate that.
What I'm thinking though is this is probably staying more focused on the Nets and the podcast and less Dungeons and Dragons. Might be just for our fan base. I think it's going to be a stronger model, but I don't want to discourage you.
Well, it's like, Durant has like a -4 health modifier right now. Like it's looking really bad. Like Kyrie, we're doing charisma ability checks on Kyrie. Everyone's just getting a little dicey because we know we're going to take a fairly big hit on him trying to convince somebody of something because the charisma's got a minus. There's other things too.
Isn't there a characteristic where this guy's known to go rogue? Like, isn't that something that can happen? I feel like that'd be a Kyrie attribute would be. This guy likes to shoot from the hip.
You could just be a rogue. You could just be a rogue. You could be a halfling or a rogue.
Natural rogue.
You're really showing really showing your lack of Dungeons and Dragons. It's embarrassing how little you know about this. I'll school you off the air, and I can give some. Maybe we can throw it out to some listeners about where I'm going to rank some people on their different ability checks, because I do have a feeling that the Venn diagram of Dungeons and Dragons and Nets fans is like the tiny sliver that my body sits right in between, and that's going to be just about it. But anyway,
this has been embarrassing for one of us. I know that.
Well, I'm not even going to read you the email exchange I had with these guys about me trying to choose a new character, because if you think it's embarrassing now, wait till if I started verbatim reading this email exchange, you'd have some real questions about what your partner in podcasting was doing with his free time off the air. All right, we're going to get out of here. Like I said, the best way to help us right now in growing a new podcast, and we've been really encouraged with the short-term growth that we had, and we're very confident that's going to keep going, is go over iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, rate and review us.
5-star,
hit subscribe, down 5 stars, or just don't bother. Write a review, which also really helps. Again, glowing review or don't bother. And then, rate and review us, subscribe, and go over to wegotnets.com. Give it a click around, read about Adam and I, look at some of the stuff that we have up there so far. We'll be posting even more as the season goes on. But when you're starting a new podcast, those are the very best ways to help. WeGotNets.com, rate and review us, iTunes, Spotify, the whole deal. Buddy, we will be back again next week if we have some new news. Otherwise, maybe a little bit closer to free agency. It's been good talking Nets with you. Go Durant.
You know it.